Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Max Velocity weather forecast. And in today's forecast, we'll be breaking down another severe weather outbreak that could impact the United States later this week. This will bring the threat for numerous damaging winds, large hail, and a few tornadoes. I'll give you the latest breakdown and everything that you need to know in this forecast, but let's first begin with what's happening across the United States right now, beginning with the central United States, which you might notice there's hardly any cloud cover. That is all due to a very dominant ridge that is keeping a large chunk of the United States dry and much warmer today. We've had some areas near record-breaking highs across the Midwest and the central and northern plains. That's expected to continue over the next 24 to 48 hours. Another small area that we're watching is back down here in the Gulf of Mexico. There's actually a subtropical storm developing. This will bring the chance for maybe some heavy rain, might lead to some flooding, and along with that some gusty winds, and we might even see a tornado risk down in the southeast going into both Wednesday and Thursday, so something to watch out for there. But elsewhere, again, very dry right now, but this will not last very long because the jet stream is about to make a big pattern change here across the United States. So what does that look like? Well, over the next few days, we'll have a very dominant ridge still across the United States. Again, this will keep a lot of our country dry and as well as much warmer for this time of the year. But once we go closer to about Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, a couple of different features to notice. One will be that subtropical storm that might bring a little bit of flooding rains and as well as gusty winds down along the Gulf Coast. But another area to watch for will be going into late Thursday and Friday back in the northwestern sections of the United States. This is where a negatively tilted trough will end up developing, and what a negatively tilted trough does is essentially pull a ton of moisture out of the Gulf of Mexico, increasing the risk for severe weather. So this is something that we have to watch for very closely going into Friday, because this will not position itself immediately over the central United States to pull all that moisture out of the Gulf, but eventually going into later Friday, that is when it's more into position. That is when we'll end up seeing the risk for severe weather across a large chunk of the United States. This entire area could actually end up seeing some severe weather once we go into Friday night into Saturday. So something to really watch for closely. Once we go through the weekend and into Monday and Tuesday of the following week, this low pressure system is still negatively tilted. What this means is that we could see more severe weather as far east as areas like the Northeast and as well as New England. So we have to watch this very closely as it continues to really evolve over the next few days. Now let me show you what that actually looks like on the future radar over the next few days. Beginning with the southeast, again, this is an area that we're watching for a subtropical storm to develop. It's going to bring similar characteristics to a low-end tropical storm with gusty winds and flooding rain being possible. There will also be a risk for tornadoes that I'll talk about later in this forecast. That'll primarily be back down in the southeast. But once we go into Thursday, that is when we'll watch a low pressure system develop over the central United States. This is really going to start developing late Thursday and into Friday. That is when a low pressure system will develop there around Kansas and Nebraska. And once we go into Friday afternoon and evening, it's going to end up starting to really intensify. We're going to watch for the threat of severe weather, potentially in the southern and central plains on Friday night. Depends on if there will be a cap in place, but we'll get to more on that here in a second. And eventually going into late Friday into Saturday, that is when storms continue to explode. Look back up into the Midwest, by the way. That is when a new recentered low pressure system will end up developing, and this will bring a risk for severe weather even up into the Ohio Valley and Midwest. So we have to watch this area closely as well. But for right now, there's no risk outlined by the Storm Prediction Center, but I would expect one to be issued at some point down the road. Once we go into late Sunday into Monday, this low pressure system starts to spin out back up into Canada, and most of this will be out of the United States by late Monday. Now, the Storm Prediction Center has now issued a slight risk for severe weather that does include Kansas back through North Texas. Now, a big thing with this event, we could see all modes of severe weather if storms fire off. But if we have a strong cap in place, a lot of the storms that could develop will not develop. That cap is basically going to prevent supercell storms from developing. So there might be a cap in place that would prevent severe weather, but I would at least expect on Friday all modes of severe weather, including damaging winds, large hail, and tornadoes if the environment is ripe, which right now does not seem to be. But some of the ingredients that we have in place is really the humidity. We're going to have a really strong southerly wind pull all that moisture out of the Gulf of Mexico, and what that's going to end up doing along a dry line is really ramping up buoyancy, and that really creates a risk for severe weather. Eventually going to late Friday into Saturday, we have a lot of humidity centered across Oklahoma, southern Kansas, and North Texas, where the dew points will be in the 60s. So this will be plenty for severe weather. Once we go into Saturday, the humidity will be as far north as areas like Michigan. So we could see another risk for severe weather going into Saturday across a large chunk of the country. Now, again, this is a bit more uncertain past Friday, but this will be an area to monitor for a risk of severe severe weather over the long term. Once we go into Sunday, that risk of severe weather will potentially exist all the way through the Northeast and back through the Southeast United States, where there will be enough moisture to be able to create the threat for severe weather also back up that direction. And you might be curious, what is that tornado risk with this event in comparison to the last two severe weather outbreaks that we've had? Well, overall, the low-level jet, which is what helps to really identify how much rotation we'll have at the lower levels of these supercells, it's not going to be too strong. Now, there will be enough of a low-level jet for at least a low-end tornado risk across the central and southern plains, around 30 to 40 knots, which in comparison to the last two events, it was upwards of 60 to 70 knots, so it is a pretty steep downgrade from the last two events. However, it will not degrade the tornado risk substantially. There will still at least be some risk of tornadoes if any supercells are discrete on Friday. Once we go into Saturday, the low-level jet will stay very similar. It will not be the strongest we've ever seen. It's going to be kind of in a moderate stage, but this is still enough for maybe a few tornadoes across anywhere from the Midwest back through the Ohio Valley and even into the lower Mississippi Valley, and eventually past then the tornado risk will be very low back over in the Northeast. And the amount of instability is pretty important for severe weather. This is basically like putting gasoline into a vehicle. It's what fuels severe thunderstorms. And once we go into Friday, the instability is really just centered across areas like southeast Kansas and back through North Texas. This is the highest risk right now for severe weather on Friday. Once we go into Saturday, that risk really does start to extend further to the north. This is going into the afternoon and evening hours on Saturday. There will be instability as far to the north as areas like Michigan and as well as eastern Illinois and southeast Wisconsin. So this will be an area to watch for Saturday. And then once we go into Sunday, the instability, there's still enough of it. There won't be as much, but there will be enough of instability for the potential for at least some marginal or slight risk of severe weather on Sunday. So be mindful of that. Damaging winds probably the main concern once we get to Saturday or Sunday, but we might still see a couple of tornadoes. In terms of the timing here across areas like Kansas, we'll be watching for some storm development going into late Friday. This is around 6 to 7 o'clock, so some storms will likely fire up. Now, in terms of how many storms we'll see is a bit of a question mark, because at this point, the European model is indicating a fairly strong cap here across most of the slight risk of severe weather. So if that happens, we will not really see any severe weather. However, if there's no cap, we very well could see some discrete cells form across Oklahoma and North Texas, which that chance right now of storms forming is still kind of around 30 to 40%. It's not that high right now, just due to the fact that cap might be in place. Eventually going through Saturday, the risk of severe weather will shift to the east. In terms of the Ohio Valley and as well as the Mississippi Valley, this will be going into Saturday. The risk for severe storms will ramp up Saturday afternoon. We'll likely be watching for a linear line of storms. This will mainly bring the concern of damaging winds, and eventually going through late Saturday into Sunday, that risk starts to push off to the east. Now, in terms of the risk in the short term, there is a risk for tornadoes really actually as early as Wednesday night and as well as into Thursday. There's right now a marginal threat for severe weather across Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. This is for the risk of maybe a couple of tornadoes with that subtropical storm, and this is what it looks like on the future radar. We'll be watching for a low pressure system developing just south of Louisiana tomorrow. This will eventually bring the risk for maybe a couple of storms with a tornado risk going into late Wednesday and Thursday, and that risk will really subside once we go into Friday. Make sure to like the video if you enjoyed and subscribe if you've not already. This forecast is brought to you by Platinum Contracting.